For 2020, I want to briefly go over the course description here. This segment is designed to make all parties aware of the types of incidents that the Department of Building responds to on a regular basis. Understanding the causes of these incidents may help deter future situations that can often lead to fatalities. For 2020, the total number of incidents we responded to at construction sites was numbered at 796. This reflects a 17% reduction from 2019, when we responded to 959 such incidents. Regrettably, 141 of those responses were for worker falls. Injuries to workers in 2020 numbered 502, a reduction of 16% from 2019, when we had 595 injuries. Fatalities in 2020 were down to 8. Well, 8 is 8 too many. We were again a 33% reduction from the 12 in 2019. This pie chart denotes what types of incidents we had on construction sites and where they occur. And as you can see, worker fell is by far, because it carries only one category, is by far the largest problem we have. The other construction related 310 fall on a variety of different areas. As a note, since the creation of the Construction Safety Compliance Unit in 2018, injuries are down 34% and fatalities are down 33%. This year's fatalities were led by 4 worker falls, 3 struck by materials, and 1 electrocution. Our significant near misses include 4 material failure, 1 structural failure, and 1 struck by incident. This year, we analyzed the injury rates by height of buildings, as well as by the number of permits. As you can see, for 2020, the total number of injuries and fatalities were in 10 or more story buildings at 377 and 3 fatalities. 7 to 9 story buildings, 50 injuries, 1 fatality, and 6 or less stories, 75 injuries and 4 fatalities. The significance here is looked at in another way by looking at the permits. So as you can see, in buildings over 9 stories, we had 15,224 permits. Those led to 3 fatalities. And so the fatality rate per worker based on 1,000 permits is 0.197. The injury rate at 377 means that there were 24.76 injuries per 1,000 permits issued on buildings greater than 9 stories. The 7 to 9 story buildings, there were 4,800 permits issued in 2020. 1 fatality, which gives you a 0.207 fatality rate per 1,000 permits, and 50 injuries, which gives you a 10.35 injury rate per 1,000 permits. Additionally, for buildings under 6 stories, we had 62,663 permits issued, 4 fatalities. Their fatality rate is at 0.064% per 1,000 permits. Their injuries at 75 puts them at 1.196 injuries per 1,000 permits. Now, we are realistic that on below 6 stories, there is less reporting of injuries that occur, but you can still see the stark reality that there are a significant number of injuries based on the number of permits on buildings over 9 stories. So now we will go into the issues of the fatalities that occurred in 2020. In Jamaica, during a demolition operation, on February 20th, 2020, construction workers were conducting a demolition operation at 147-07 94th Avenue in Queens. One of the workers was operating in close proximity to a concrete beam, cutting the rebar. If you look at the photograph, you'll see a tarp on the left-hand side of the picture, and to the right of that tarp is the area where the beam existed. A robotic demolition machine had chipped away the concrete at each end of the beam to expose the rebar for cutting. After cutting on one end of the beam's rebar, the beam rolled off the support columns and pulled the attached wall down on top of the worker. The worker succumbed to his injuries, and a second worker was also injured. This incident was categorized as struck by in the OSHA categories, and our investigation determined that failure to follow proper demolition sequencing, deviating from the approved plans, failure to shore and brace the beam, all contributed to this fatality. There was also missing site safety logs at this site. Our next incident was in Borough Park. On June 20, 2020, a homeowner at 1154 39th Street, Brooklyn, hired an unlicensed electrical worker to install hi-hat lighting in their home. The worker was in the cockloft area of the home putting in new wiring. The worker cut an existing wire in the cockloft, which was still energized, resulting in him being electrocuted. The worker succumbed to his injuries. This incident, again, was categorized as electrocution in the OSHA categories. What went wrong here is that an unlicensed worker was performing electrical work on an energized line and was key to contributing factor to the fatality. On June 16th, 2020, workers were executing a large facade restoration project at an 11-story building at 136 East 36th Street. A worker on a suspended scaffold rig was lowering the scaffold at the end of the workday. While descending the building, a large section of cornice had separated from the building and fell down on top of him, killing him. The cornice landed on the suspended scaffold and sidewalk shed, and as you can see, the sidewalk shed withheld the incident here. But in addition to the worker who was fatally injured, 3 other workers suffered serious injuries. This was categorized as material fall, and there was a failure to institute adequate safety procedures that was a major factor to this fatality. This remains under investigation by the Department of Investigation. Greenpoint. On June 20, 2020, workers were constructing a new cast-in-place concrete building at 30 Kent Avenue in Brooklyn. The construction worker had completed the 11th floor of the building and were in the process of relocating the guardrails on the exterior of the formwork to create a perimeter that was cantilevered off the building. Vertical netting was then installed after the guardrail installation. A worker who was installing vertical netting at the perimeter on the 11th floor stepped on a piece of cantilevered formwork built to allow work near the leading edge. At the same time, other construction workers were working on the floor below and removed the shoring supporting that same formwork. The formwork then collapsed under the worker's feet, causing him to fall 10 stories and landing next to the hoist. The worker succumbed to his injuries. The worker was not wearing a safety harness at the time of the collapse. That day, neither a site-specific safety orientation nor a pre-shift safety meeting had been given to the co-workers as required by the code. This incident was categorized as worker fall, and the lack of a site safety briefing, no pre-task plan meeting, not following the site safety plan, and failure to follow work sequencing were all key factors to this fatality. The worker should have been utilizing PPE, specifically a safety harness, and should have been tied off since he was relocating guardrails that created a controlled access zone at the perimeter of the building. On August 20th, 2020, a worker was working inside a single-family home at 1465 56th Street in Brooklyn. They were in the process of reframing a bathroom partition wall over the stairwell that you see in this photograph. The left-hand picture shows you what they used as a guardrail, which was a short piece of plywood that had been placed vertically at the floor's edge, but was not sufficient as a guardrail since it did not meet the height requirements. While performing the reframing work, which was being done directly above where that piece of plywood is, the worker lost his balance and fell down headfirst into the stairwell and fell down the stairwell to the first floor, where he succumbed to his injuries. This incident was considered a worker fall, and the lack of proper work sequencing, failure to create a controlled access zone, in addition to inadequate guardrails, and failure to tie off were all contributing factors to this incident. We now move to the financial district. 1 Wall Street, September 18th, 2020. A major construction project was underway at 1 Wall Street in Manhattan. The security guard who worked in the building was at the end of his shift and was awaiting access to an area of the first floor prior to leaving the site. While waiting, the guard leaned against the guardrail, protecting an opening shaftway. Prior to him leaning on that guardrail, workers had removed the guardrails to perform work on a duct. The rails were not adequately reinstalled as required, leaving large openings near the opening of the duct. The railing on which the security guard was leaning failed, and the guard fell 62 feet through the opening into a mechanical shaft, where he succumbed to his injuries. So as you see on the left-hand side in these photographs, they did not properly reattach that railing when they were done. The railing bent over, and the worker fell down the shaftway that you see in the right-hand picture. Again, this was labeled as a worker fall. And what went wrong was the failure to properly install and maintain guardrails, which was a key factor in this facility. We now move to East Williamsburg. During a supported scaffold installation on November 30, 2020, a worker was erecting a supported scaffold at 710 Metropolitan Avenue, Brooklyn. The site is a 7-story building that was undergoing permitted alteration work, and the worker stepped on an unsecured plank, which upended, causing the worker to fall from the 3rd level. He fell approximately 24 feet and succumbed to his injuries. This again is labeled as a worker fall. And what went wrong here is that they failed to secure the deck planks before relying on them to support their load and their body weight, and stepping on a cantilevered section, which was a key factor to this fatality. Our final fatality of the year was at 454 42nd Street in Brooklyn on 12/28 of 2020. Workers were hired to excavate the area adjacent to a retaining wall in a backyard. The wall separated the land between 2 houses, one at 454 42nd Street and the other at 453 43rd Street. The workers had not implemented adequate shoring measures for the retaining wall adjacent to their excavation. They were excavating underneath the wall to pour a bigger footing. As a result, the retaining wall collapsed into the backyard at 454 42nd Street and onto the 2 workers. One of the workers succumbed to his injuries. The other was treated at the hospital and later released. The excavation and repair work on this retaining wall did not have the required DOB work permits. This was categorized under OSHA by struck by. And what went wrong is that the retaining wall was not constructed properly. They failed to shore and brace the unstable wall prior to do work beneath it. And that was a key factor to how this fatality occurred. So we've added in the last couple of years some issues on near misses to make you aware of things that are unfortunate incidents that could have become much worse. The department investigated other construction-related incidents that could have easily ended in tragedy, but did not, despite having all the makings of a potentially fatal incident. Below is a review of notable potentially fatal near misses of 2020. On May 8, 2020, workers will reposition a piece of climbing formwork on a building located at 124 East 14th Street in Manhattan. Using a crane as part of the means and methods, the workers climbed onto the piece of formwork and rode that formwork to open the climbing shoes. When the workers detached the panel, they lost control of the panel and it pulled away from the building wall, leaving 3 workers dangling by harnesses. In addition to riding the formwork, which is absolutely forbidden, the workers attached their harnesses to the formwork, and had they completely lost the formwork, could have extremely exacerbated the situation. Thank God for tying off. I am now going to show you a video that was shot right after the incident happened. But one of the things that I want you to look at is not so much the 3 workers who are dangling on their harnesses, but look at the numerous workers who are standing on leading edges where the railings had been removed during the incident to prepare for the day's operation. And look on the periphery of how many other people could have been injured. A stark reminder to tie off. On July 13, 2020, there was a major permitted alteration project that was underway on an existing 6-story commercial office at 4518 Court Square in Queens. As part of the alteration, the contractor was going to cast new concrete columns within the existing brick and mortar structure. While the work was going on to cast a new concrete column at the 6th floor, the pressure from the concrete pour caused the existing facade of the building to bulge outward 1.5 inches. Had it continued to bulge, the incident could have caused a potential collapse of the facade of the building down onto a busy Queen Street. Thankfully, there were no issues related to this incident. This was considered a material failure, and the failure to shore and brace the existing structure, the failure to tie the existing wall into the new concrete floors were major contributing factors to this incident. Murray Hill, July 16, 2020, the same day as the fatality, 2 blocks away on 36th Street. The workers here were performing excavation work at 509 3rd Avenue. The picture on the left shows a photograph of the work when they started that morning. They were working in preparation for a planned new 35-story tower project. Adjacent to the site was the existing building directly in front of you on the photograph. at 211 East 34th Street. While channeling soil at 509 3rd Avenue, the workers observed the wall movements at 211 East 34th Street and subsequently moved their machinery away from the unstable building. Eventually, it collapsed. Fortunately, the workers noticed the hazardous condition in time, and the partially collapsed building was vacant at the time of the incident. There were no injuries reported, but you can see on the right-hand side that the building completely collapsed into the site. And you can see from the photograph on the left that there were workers working there a little bit earlier that day. This was under the category of excavation and soil work, and the failure of the contractor to shore and brace the neighboring building, failure to monitor the building wall, failure to evaluate the neighboring building, and failure to have basic understandings of how the rock that these buildings were built on functioned were all contributing factors in this incident. On October 29th, 2020, at 111 West 57th Street in Manhattan, on a windy evening on October 29, a headache ball that was attached to a tower crane struck the facade of a new tower construction site at 111 West 57th Street. DOB had issued a wind advisory, and the crane had been put into weather vaning configuration while not in use. This allows the crane to safely spin 360 degrees in the wind in order to reduce wind resistance on the crane's boom. While weather vaning, the speed of the weather vaning picked up such that the headache ball was spinning so fast, it actually lifted to a perpendicular position from the tip of the crane. The line from the top of the tip of the crane to the headache ball was 35 feet long, but the tip of the crane was only 25 feet from the building. The ball at the end of the boom repeatedly swung into the building and hit the construction site at the upper floors, which resulted in large sections of glass and aluminum debris raining down into the street below. The crane had been left out of service with an excessive amount of drift in the load line. Fortunately, no one was injured. This category incident was material fall, and our investigation determined that excessive slack in the load line allowed the hook and ball to reach the structure while the crane was weather vaning. Proper tower crane shortage procedures for high wind events should include shortening the load line so they could not hit the building in its proximity. .540 Fulton Street in Brooklyn. On December 25th, 2020, after DOB had released a high wind advisory due to the incoming weather front, the contractor failed to button down the site and secure all of the operational windows. In the ensuing winds, 2 windows were ripped out of the building and rained down onto Fulton Street. 5 additional windows dangled over the street and are in danger of falling off, as you can see in the left picture and the center picture. That was 2 of the 5 windows that were left dangling. An additional 74 windows needed to be secured and received some damage. No injuries were reported. And now we go back to 111 West 57th Street. The same storm from the incident on Christmas Day moved into Manhattan the next day. It caught an open window that was located in the tower on 111 West 57th Street. And if you look up approximately where the bottom of the boom is on the crane and look to your right, you will see the missing window that has a piece of plywood in it. And the right-hand picture shows you the glass as it was laying on the street on December 26th. It tore the window completely out of the frame and dropped it into the middle of West 57th Street. The contractor was aware that the window had previously been damaged, and they failed to do anything to repair it or secure it for the upcoming wind conditions. So as you can see from all the near misses that we talked about, every one of them could have led to fatalities or multiple fatalities. And that's unacceptable to us. And we will continue to work hard to take action and enforcement action against anyone who fails to provide safety to the public and to the workers.